I also want to go off on a rant about a caller that I had yesterday, except my rant just vanished. About useful idiots. And it turns out there's a lot of useful idiots in America. Yesterday, a caller into this show called and echoed Congressman Paul Ryan's recent comments, blaming the black community basically for poverty in America. He threw out a phony Fox so-called news statistic arguing that, and I quote, 73% of African-American women in this country ages 17 to 35 have children without a man in the house, and the majority of this group of people lives in the cities. Well, first of all, that's not true. According to the most recent government statistics, 72% of black babies are born to unmarried mothers today. But that's a completely different thing from saying that 73% of African-American women in this country have a child without a man in the house. It's a completely different thing. That would only be true if 100% of African-American women had babies and only had one. But if half of African-American women don't have babies, then your 73% becomes half of that, which is what, 46.5%, 47%. And if they have two children, then that becomes half of that, which becomes 25. So, you can see this is a perfect demonstration of the old saying often attributed to Mark Twain that figures don't lie, but liars can figure. In fact, the birth rate for unmarried black women in America has been falling for almost 40 years, and most of the evidence points to changes in unmarried birth rates among both black and white women in America, a drop that started in the 1970s for both groups, coinciding with the legalization of abortion and the beginning of widespread use of oral contraceptives. This just basically changed the dynamic of marriage in America, and that number, that variable of the percentage of women in both races who have children out of wedlock has been largely unaffected over the years by some really big swings in our welfare programs. So why is it that conservatives, like yesterday's caller and Fox so-called News' useful idiots and Congressman Paul Ryan, why is it that they're obsessed with the notion that blacks in the black community are responsible for poverty in America? Well, there's actually an answer to that question. Like so much that's wrong with America today, it all started with Ronald Reagan. Reagan is famous for his speeches and his one-liners about welfare queens, but as author Ian Haney Lopez pointed out in an interview on Moyers and Company, it really all began with Reagan's earliest welfare stump speech back in 1980 when he was running for president. Reagan would speak to white Americans and say something along the lines of, I understand how frustrating it is for you when you're standing in line at a grocery store waiting to buy a hamburger and there's some young fellow ahead of you waiting to buy a T-bone with food stamps. But as Lopez points out, the first time Reagan gave that stump speech, young fellow was replaced with young buck, a racially coded term for young black man. Basically, Reagan was telling white Americans that they were being taken advantage of by blacks on food stamps, and that it was made possible by the government taking their money through taxes and then giving it to undeserving black people. So in response to the outrage that Reagan drummed up, he suggested his infamous tax cuts, dropping the top rate that billionaires pay from 74% down to 28%. After all, he told middle-class voters, who got a very small income tax cut, by the way, why should you pay taxes to a government that's just turning around and giving that money to undeserving black people who are using it to eat fancy steak dinners? This is really similar to the recent outrage over at Fox so-called News about people on food stamps buying crab and lobster, something that's possible, but so rare it has no effect on the overall tax we all pay for food stamps. Lopez goes on to say that for the past 50 years, Republicans have been telling white Americans that the biggest threat to their lives are minorities, and the minorities have taken over government and are eating up all the money. I mean, just last week, Congressman Paul Ryan went on Bill Bennett's Morning in American program and said, and I quote, we have got this tailspin of culture in our inner cities in particular of men not working and just generations of men not even thinking about working or learning the value and the culture of work. And so there's a real culture problem here that has to be dealt with. In other words, Paul Ryan was saying that lazy black men in the inner cities are responsible for poverty in America. And so for some 50 years now, Republicans have been using race-baiting tactics and dog whistle politics like this to convince Americans that the black community is behind poverty in this country. And frankly, that's just not true. I mean, you can see many of the same trends in the largely white Appalachia region of the United States as you do in the minority-heavy inner cities. In Appalachia, white Americans are struggling with poverty and having children out of wedlock, just like their black inner-city counterparts. And according to the Pew Research Center's Social and Demographic Trends Project, in 2012, the median net worth of a white household was $91,400 in the United States, while the median net worth of a black household was $6,400. So a black child starts out at a very different place than a white child, both economically and socially. But conservatives still argue that blacks are behind poverty in America. The social and cultural problem that we see in black communities across America and in white communities in Appalachia are responses to poverty, not the causes of it. It's time for Americans and lawmakers in Washington to wake up and start talking about the real causes of poverty in America, which include massive inequality produced by our tax code, joblessness produced by our trade policies, and ongoing discrimination by a largely white economic and political power structure. And only when we start having that conversation about what's really going on in this country, only then will every American have an equal shot at the American dream, regardless of their race. And an American dream, by the way, that I would add, and in fact, just an hour or so ago, we had a conversation with Patrick Lovell. If you are in New York City, this is yesterday's one sheet. Where'd it go? Here it is. If you are in New York City, any minute now, down at the Quad Cinema, it actually started about 15 minutes ago, but you can still make your way down there. The Rated SR, Socially Relevant Film Festival, is happening in New York City today, and at 5 o'clock, Forward 13 is playing, and it's about recapturing the American dream in a way that makes sense. How do we have a sustainable American dream?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Patrick Lovell's website, by the way, is forward13thefilm.com. We'll be right back.